Hi, I'm Andy Schmuckler. I'm here to talk about my passion to understand things. It's been a driving passion in my life as far back as I can see. And the life I've led has been a mixture of feeling like I've had really good success in understanding some some things that are important really well. But it all takes place within uh, a a sense of like an impenetrable mystery, the mind boggled, the things that I simply have never been able to understand and recognize that I never will. I remember being a kid, like maybe 5 years old. I think I was lying on the grass and there's sunflowers growing above me, and I was thinking about the universe. I mean, what is understanding about? It's about feeling, seeing things clearly, and if you see things clearly, there's a sense in which you can deal with them better. You're not so weak and ineffectual as somebody who's clueless or completely ignorant. But in addition, there's a meaningfulness about seeing one's place in the great scheme of things. And this is the nature of the world that I live in, with this thing that I understand, that I see clearly. I think it's both a spiritual thing to penetrate the reality, and it's also a kind of I don't know, defense mechanism doesn't quite get it because it's not like denial of the truth, but it is a means of protecting oneself. There's a motivation to understand things. It probably has to do with some sense of there being dangers to be protected from. But anyway, that's who I emerge as. Here I am, this 5 year old kid, and I'm thinking, trying to situate myself in the big picture. You know, well, what is this universe thing? And how, and then I get to these mind-boggling things having to do with both time and space. With time, when did it start? Well, if it started at such and such a time, what was there before that? And if it never started but has always been there, like an infinity of time somehow has passed, that doesn't that boggles the mind too. Time before time began, time never having a beginning but always was. I realized that something disturbing at that point, that not only did I not understand the answer to the question, what about this universe and the time thing? I couldn't imagine an answer that would be comprehensible to me. I hated that feeling. I, I mean, I don't think I ran into the house kicking and screaming, but that thing sort of always lurked there. I mean, it was a way I might occasionally, once every few months, I might sort of torture myself by looking again about you know, the mind boggle, that you're never going to understand this. And the same thing with space. You say, well, okay, the universe, what is it? All this, everything, well, what about space? I mean, is there a limit to how far it goes? If the answer is yes or the answer is no, it's equally incomprehensible to me. Again, another question, like the idea of whether if the universe has a limit, what does it mean to say there's nothing beyond it? I mean, how does space exist? How does time exist? Oh, it would be a way of showing me that as much as I might work to understand things, it's just something fundamentally mysterious. Where did it come from? Oh, God made it, is one of the answers. Yeah, obviously, the next question is, well, who made God? Well, if nobody made God, how can something be there that had no origin? And if that can be true of God, why couldn't it be true of the universe without him? It just didn't answer any questions. And I couldn't imagine. Uh, I couldn't imagine an answer that I could comprehend. And that always sort of provided a humbling, hovering presence around my labors to understand this and that and to articulate the understanding. Here we are sitting on this planet around this sun and this galaxy and all these other galaxies, and we're talking about almost 14 billion years, and space so big that light can travel for all that time and reach us now. Uh, that, that's kind of mind-boggling in itself, isn't it? So, but here on this earth, I really do think there are a lot of things that can be understood. And that's why I commend to your attention my Better Human story, which I think really does provide some important pieces of understanding. Going back to what the limits that I've experienced, I was very frustrated by the idea of infinity. There has to be the concept of infinity because there is no limit in the magnitudes and numbers and such that get you into talking about infinity. But it's sort of hard to grasp something that's without limit. So when I was a junior in high school, I tackled that. I was in a really kind of first-rate math class with a first-rate math teacher who assigned us all to do a project. And I did mine on infinity, and I wrestled with infinity for some weeks. And I wrote something like 25 pages about infinity and the different forms of infinity and some of the issues about infinity. But still, it's mind-boggling. Yes and no. You can sort of turn off a part of your mind where you see, can you really grasp what you're talking about? Turn that part off, and then you sort of just play with the concepts. But still, I have had a friend who was a professor of philosophy who used to joke around by saying something like, "Why is there something rather than nothing at all?" And I heard him tell that punchline at various junctures in various group conversations, maybe a handful of times. And I never really saw the point of the question. I think I gathered that it was something philosophers have asked. But then there came a day when I actually took a look at that question, and the bottom fell out. Why is there something rather than nothing at all? Yeah. What would it mean for there to be nothing at all? And how can there be something? Again, I can't imagine an answer that would be comprehensible for me. So, and besides infinity, there was another thing that I've been exposed to as an adolescent that was really disturbing to me with my passion to, to grasp, uh, intellectually get it, uh, the truth about how we understand it. And that's Einstein's theory of relativity. Let's see what I think the form that I could express what I couldn't understand. If somebody's sitting on the back of a train in the front and the train is moving away from the station, and on the platform back at the station, there's a person, and the guy on the train throws, let's say, a football. Obviously, the speed of the football relative to The guy who threw it would be, like it would be if everybody was stationary. And but it would be slower with respect to the person who's on the platform. So it wouldn't get as far and it wouldn't come as fast because it would be speed of the throw minus speed of the train. And conversely, if somebody's sitting on the locomotive and you're coming toward the platform and throws the football, the speed will be additive and it'll come fast to the guys receiving it on the platform. But according to Einstein, when it comes to the speed of light, it doesn't work that way. No matter whether the train's coming or going, the guy on the platform and the guy sending something out, in this case a beam of light, would both measure the speed of the light at 186,000 miles per second, c, as they call it in physics. It just didn't make sense to me. It still doesn't really make sense to me. I seem to come into the world with some assumptions about how things are supposed to be. And if the world doesn't correspond to them, like evidently is the case with what the book I'm reading now calls the cosmic speed limit, c, at a speed at which things without mass like photons and all the electromagnetic and all that stuff, that goes through the cosmos at that speed, according to anybody measuring anywhere, regardless of relative motion. I was very troubled by that because I operate my thinking in certain logical ways, and this didn't make sense to me. So when I was a freshman in college, taking a physics class, which had an assignment to do a paper, I chose the theory of relativity so that I could study it and hope to come to terms with it. I don't really remember how well I came to terms with it. I remember I still struggled with these Lorentz contractions and such that Einstein used as data to generate this new way of understanding the cosmos that really changed a lot of things and made it less intelligible to the likes of me with a kind of Newtonian way of thinking. I mean, Newton sort of cranked things out so that time and space and force were, well, are my kind of thing. But with Einstein and the warping of space and of time, it's really kind of mind-boggling. And I wonder if this question is a reasonable one. It's one which is on my mind as I read this book. I think it's called Waves on an Impossible Sea by, what's his name, Strassler or something like that. Anyways, he's brilliant. It's for me, the opening chapters of the book took way too long to get to interesting places, but I feel like he's teaching me a lot, and he's good at it from that point on. The picture of the truth about this cosmos that we live in is so elaborate and complex and puzzling. Things like matter and antimatter and dark matter and relationships between matter and energy and particles made up of particles made up of particles with strange characteristics. And I've started wondering, um, and wondering if the question even makes sense. Wondering what this author would say if I had the chance to ask him directly. What does it say about this universe that we exist in, this cosmos that we exist in, that it is put together this way? Uh, is it the only way things could work? There some simpler way reality might have been put together in terms of all these fields and mass and energy and dark energy and black holes. What does it tell us about the nature of our situation that this cosmos is this way? Does it tell us anything about how come it's here? Does it tell us anything about any way in which that how come has got to do with some larger consciousness that had intention, that brought it into existence? I mean, where does everything come from? Is this any clue? Well, like I said, I don't know if that question makes sense, and I don't know if he'd have an interesting answer. But I feel like it's mind-boggling. I can make sense of how life has evolved on this planet, how planets formed, okay, yeah, and how the Earth got to be a place where it had this relationship to the sun, and where it became possible for self-replicating organisms to come into existence. I've written a piece, maybe I should try to make it available, that to me, the story starts making sense at that point. Once you've got a planet where you have the possibility of self-replicating whatevers emerging and developing as it inevitably would, as these self-replicating things don't do a perfect job of self-replicating every time, and a selective process will inevitably start molding more and more complex cells, multicellular organisms, ecosystems, biospheres eventually, over huge stretches of time. I get that. Darwin's idea, I don't know how fully you can say he got his idea, but he laid out the essence of it, and he got enough of it that I think he's just, he's a hero. Wow, that makes sense of a lot of stuff. That puts a lot of stuff in a different perspective. And then my Better Human Story takes that Darwinian perspective where life creates order, because that's what works to make it into the future of this community of self-replicating creatures. And then eventually to reach a point where life, which is not directed by purpose or there's no pre-planning, there's no blueprint. Oh, in 3 billion years, we're going to reach this point, and in 3.5 billion years, we're going to, no, it's just whatever works, building on what has been to create what will be. And I get that. And I get that order makes a certain point in the history of our species worthy of a whole lot more attention than it has ever received. Really, a whole lot more attention. And that is when we took a step unprecedented in the history of life and started inventing our own way of life as a way of extricating ourselves from the niche in which we evolved biologically. That book is about the inevitable consequences of that. And to skip a variety of steps, the inevitable consequence of that is a destructive force will be unleashed upon the human world, the creature that creates civilization. That very stepping onto the path of civilization, extricating themselves from their place in the natural order, they will plunge into a kind of a disorder, which generates a systemic force, inevitably. So that I say, any creature on any planet that steps onto the path of civilization, it will have evolved biologically to the point where it is able to invent its own way of life and extricate itself from its niche. Oh, turns out that there is unforeseen. Not only does evolution not look forward, life on Earth is just unfolding, come what may. But a creature that takes this step has no idea that this is creating a new kind of disorder. This kind of disorder is going to generate a new kind of selective process, which is going to be destructive in many ways, inevitably, until that destructive force is brought under control. So my Better Human story is all about showing that force and showing the ramifications of that force. So I do think that there is an understanding of some value that my labors of 60 years have brought me here to offer. And I think that there is no particular way that I can see that my inability to understand some of these big surrounding cosmic issues, I don't think really diminishes how illuminating this Better Human story is. Those cosmic questions take place at a level that goes beyond and before the beginnings of the evolution of life. And with the evolution of life, the emergence, an emergent reality called value, which is another way the evolutionary perspective leads to a better understanding. There is really such a thing as better and worse because there are creatures that experience things as better or worse. That's necessary for any meaningful sense of value. But not only that, but evolution has put that into creatures like us, and not only us, because it helped serve life. The ancestors who had that built-in sense of better and worse and motivation to go for the better and to avoid the worse, they were selected for because the better and the worse were correlated with survival value. That means, jumping a bit, the moral dimension, which a lot of people have given short shrift to, really has a foundation in reality. And it is an important reality. And it is, at least in its root, a life-serving reality. Similarly, the evolutionary perspective says that we've got a capacity as a species. It's widespread in the species, even in small communities, to have the capacity for a special kind of experience called spiritually transformative. I mean, it is an empirical reality that it's widespread in the human world, to such an extent that I think you can say we have evolved to have that capacity. That, again, it wouldn't be in there if it hadn't been advantageous in terms of surviving to get one's DNA into the future, to have that capacity. In other words, the impact of those spiritually transformative experiences has, on balance, led people to make good choices measured by the triumph of life over death. So the moral and spiritual dimensions get revived if you look at them, the issue, through an evolutionary perspective. If we understand evolution in a multidimensional way well enough, we can infer that things that are built into us must have been life-serving. Doesn't mean they necessarily fully match these unnatural situations, since they were instilled when we were living in this niche in which we evolved biologically. But I've wrestled with this issue, and I think at the fundamental level, what was good for hunter-gatherers is also good for us. Peace, goodwill, love rather than hate, justice rather than injustice, and so on and so on. These are realities. They are realities because they're built into us to want the more whole. And if we have a secular worldview whose understanding of things hasn't incorporated the implications of the evolutionary perspective well enough, we get what I've encountered for the last 30 years in liberal America, which is a kind of a blindness to what the moral and spiritual dimensions are showing. So, for example, in America, a truly dark force was visibly rising starting in the early 90s, with Limbaugh and Gingrich playing the roles that they were playing. Something was visible. But a lot of people with a secular worldview didn't have a place in their minds for this thing that's rising. And when we look at this destructive force that I talked about that's inevitable, we're led to see that there are ways in which it moves the brokenness through the human world over time. That brokenness begets brokenness. So you can see a force which moves things, which consistently works to make things more broken. Brokenness takes one form at one point, and then the consequences of that are that it takes another form at another point. The way war creates trauma, two different forms of brokenness, and trauma can create war too. I've studied Hitler's life, and I think there's some of that there. World War I, and to the monstrosity he became. Not that that's all of it. Brokenness begets brokenness, a force moving through the world, spreading a pattern of brokenness. Oh, that actually is something that corresponds pretty well with what traditionally has been called evil. And indeed, part of the task of this moment in terms of understanding is for the secular worldview, which has given both the moral and spiritual dimensions short shrift, needs to learn its own way of incorporating into its understanding what the religious worldview used to have more readily. The idea that there's a good and evil. The Bible has no trouble with that. The idea that there are people getting struck on the road to Damascus or being spoken to by a burning bush. Spiritually transformative experiences. Bible makes it obvious they're important. They're pivotal. But the secular worldview hasn't honored those things. But if you apply the secular worldview, which includes the evolutionary perspective, properly, think through the implications of each stage, you see that we've got in ourselves something which is not to be dismissed as a second-rate pseudo-reality that's just subjective and a matter of opinion. No, the moral dimension, however many variations there may be of it, at the core, there's something life-serving that we're supposed to honor and tune in on because it's a source of meaningful messages. Doesn't necessarily mean it tells us everything we need to know. But the moral dimension is real, important, and life-serving. Likewise, the spiritual dimension, not to be dismissed as something that's sort of all just woo-woo. It is part of our nature to have those experiences, and it's there because it must have turned out that the spiritual truths that people came back with were good to know, and that the impact on their lives when people change the course of their lives after they're struck by a lightning bolt on the road to Damascus, it turns out that those changes in their lives that people brought back from those transformative experiences must have had a beneficial impact on the ability of that person, or more likely the whole group, to get their DNA into the future, compared to the lesser success of those who didn't have that capacity. I think it follows logically. I mean, the logic that doesn't tell me what was before time and what's beyond space does seem to work at the level of the human story. And I've been laboring to create an integrative vision of the destructive force, the way it's moved, the conflict at the center of the drama of any civilization-creating creature, and to show that we are better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be, because it follows from this. The ugliness we see in human history is not a clear picture of human nature. It is an inevitable byproduct of the step onto the path of civilization, the release of a destructive force that we are challenged to bring under control. That much I feel that I do understand. And as for the mysteries of the cosmos, it gives me gooseflesh, and I have come to terms with it better. But still mind-boggling is troubling for me. But awe has become more part of my relationship to it. A certain degree of resignation to the limits of my ability to understand, and not even understanding why there are those kinds of limits. I hope I'm not making any big mistakes because I assume certain things that people throwing footballs or light beams off of moving trains don't capture. And with quantum mechanics, the idea that something can happen and there's no cause at all, why this atom goes radioactive and this one does not, and there's nothing about the situation beforehand that differentiates them. I believe in causality. I'm just very attached to causality. So I do challenge myself. Am I applying my insisting on certain categories like additive motion and cause and effect? Does that diminish how much I'm capturing the truth about the human story? No, I challenge myself, but I've never yet found from inside my thinking a way in which my thinking limits itself that way. But check it out for yourself. You go to betterhumanstory.org and see if this integrative picture of the human story, which includes why civilization has developed the way it has, why it isn't the reflection we assume on human nature, why we're better creatures than we thought we were, why the spirit of the gangster inevitably has a disproportionate say in how any civilization will develop, why it is inevitable that when some creature on any planet steps across the line, they will unleash a force that means that the battle at the center of their drama will look a whole lot like what the religions called the battle between good and evil, but understood in a purely naturalistic way. And please follow me. I will do my absolute best to share what I understand, both about our present emergency as Americans to save our democracy, which is our present moment's version of that larger problem of bringing a destructive force under control. And at the larger level of understanding what our situation is, which is deeply, deeply connected with what we can see if we look at that moment when we left the order in which we evolved and unleashed disorder on the world.